Right, thank you for that introduction. So I've only got half an hour. This was described to me as the graveyard shift, the first talk on after lunch. So I'm going to try and keep you awake with some salacious gossip, but also explaining the political role of the Empress Eugénie, who, of course, was the wife of Napoleon III. That, as we're going to discover, is quite a difficult job in itself. But being empress is not easy. You've got the eyes of all of France and indeed the world on you. So I'm going to start with a few quotes. We didn't create the empire so that he could marry her. You get the emphasis on the her there, right? The woman just isn't French, doesn't like France or the French. Not a great start for someone who's Empress of the French, right? And then, sorry, no children in the audience, hopefully. You go to bed with women like her, but you certainly don't marry them. This is a guy called Plon Plon, who's an absolutely despicable man. And the reason I've given you these quotes is to show just how hard her job is. So Persigny, that's Napoleon III's best friend. And these two are his cousins, Mathilde, who he was actually engaged to in the 1830s, and Plon Plon. So these are people who the very survival of the Bonapartist empire is massively in their interests, and they hate our empress that we're going to be celebrating, just to illustrate how difficult her job is going to be. So who is she? Well, as you know, she was born on the 5th of May, 1826, 200 years ago, in Spain. This date is slightly overshadowed in the Napoleonic calendar because it's also the date that Napoleon Bonaparte died in exile. And Napoleon III, the husband, absolutely obsessed with his uncle. So it must have been a bittersweet day for him, celebrating his wife's birthday and lamenting the death of his uncle. But we're here to talk about the Empress, so I don't want to dwell on it too long. She was supposedly born during an earthquake, and you can see the quote from her there. What would the ancients have thought of such an omen? Surely they would have said I was destined to unsettle the world. So you can see she has a pretty strong opinion of herself, that she's someone who's going to have an impact, and of course she does. And partially that's because she is super posh, not a royal, but very posh, especially on the father's side. So here you are, Maria Eugenia Ignacia Agustina de Palafox y Kirkpatrick. She's Spanish. It's a lot of names, isn't it? On her mother's side, slightly less illustrious. Her mother's father was a Scottish wine merchant who moved to Spain and went bankrupt several times. But the father, Don Cipriano, there he is with the eye patch. He goes way back, one of the oldest families in Spain, and he is a Bonapartist. He fought for Napoleon. In 1808, Napoleon invades Spain, creates a puppet regime with his brother as the king. He did this all across Europe. And Don Cipriano, Eugénie's father, rallies to the Napoleonic cause, fights for the French. When some guy called the Duke of Wellington kicks the French out of Spain, he goes with the French army, ends up in Paris, defending Paris from the Allies who are closing in 1814. In 1815, Napoleon has a comeback tour, lasts 100 days. Again, this guy, Duke of Wellington, turns up, ruins it all. But Don Cipriano is fighting during 100 days. So he's not someone who's swept up in circumstances. He believes in Napoleon and the Napoleonic cause. Now, Eugénie, she's born in 1826, and she loves her dad, absolutely adores him, and they go for long rides in the countryside in Spain, and he regales her with these stories of how he fought for Napoleon, how great Napoleon is. She then moves to Paris. It's decided Spain is very volatile. I don't think surely don't move to France then in the 19th century, also dangerous, but slightly safer than Spain. She grows up in Paris. Education is very religious, and her dad says, you should read about Napoleon. You can see the analysis here of an 8-year-old. You tell us to read Napoleon and learn its history. It made me cry a lot. So there you go, sad stuff. But she's really buying into the myth of Napoleon, and not only because of her dad, but she has got one of the greatest 19th century storytellers, Stendhal. French novelist, wrote The Red and the Black, Charterhouse of Panama, sort of Dickens-like figure in France, if you're not familiar with him. Every Thursday, he would come round to their house in Paris. There's 2 girls, by the way, older sister called Paca, and he would regale them of his own tales serving with Napoleon, and everyone would end on a cliffhanger. So, he invades Russia, he gets to Moscow. What happens next? Oh, yeah, well, if you know your Napoleon history, what happens next is not good. But so she really is interested in Napoleon as a celebrity, as most people in the 19th century are, and she's well-versed in his history. Education, extremely religious, Paris convent school. She comes to England briefly, goes to boarding school. She hates her time there because she's bullied. She's bullied for having red hair. So it goes to show that some things never change in history. But her hair is amazing. I've shown you this image to show you. This wonderful autumnal auburn hair. You're obliged to say legally Titian would have loved to paint it. And as she becomes an adult, she is considered to be stunningly beautiful and attractive, and one of the most eligible women in Europe. But she doesn't marry. until the age of 26, which is quite late for the 19th century. And she marries this guy, Napoleon III, Louis Napoleon. So I need to explain to you in about 2 minutes some very complex history, so hold tight. Right, until the age of 40, Louis Napoleon's life had been a miserable failure. He's obsessed with his uncle, the more famous Napoleon we've mentioned, and he wants to recreate his uncle's empire, but this is an absurd dream that people laugh at him for. It's never going to happen. It's a bit like I said to you, right, we're going to recreate Cromwell's Commonwealth. Who's with me? Not many people, right? He twice tries to seize power, doesn't work. But he still believes he's a man of destiny, he will rule France. People in France don't want him to do that. Here's another quote for you. This is what the political elite of France think. Imagine a little man of 4.5 feet, ugly and vulgar with large moustaches and the eyes of a pig. He lives openly with a 15th rate. That's really going down the rates, isn't it? It's not even third rate. Actress, very beautiful literary named Miss Howard, more of her later. This is because he lives in London as an exile, a dandy, a womanizer, and a failed politician. But then in 1848 February, there's another revolution in France. The king is swept away again. A republic is declared again. And this is the greatest experiment in democracy yet in human history. The president is going to be elected directly by the French people. Well, male French people, women not so much. Allowed to vote. So he thinks, I'm going to throw my hat into the ring. The French political class say, please don't do that, but you are going to humiliate yourself. Here's one quote about him. He gets elected to Parliament, makes his first speech. The newspapers and indeed everyone in the chamber are laughing. This is what they say. So foreign to France, he can barely stutter its language because he's grown up in exile in the Swiss-German border. He's got quite a heavy German accent to his French. Have you ever tried to speak French in France? They don't like accents. Even worse, this is one of his colleagues in Parliament, the most negligent and inept member of the Assembly who has lived the effeminate life of an English aristocrat. That's bad, isn't it? Especially in France. So what happens? He wins by a landslide. Of course he does. 75% of the people in France vote for him, making him the most popular man in history. Not until 1892 does the popular votes go beyond that in a US election. So it doesn't matter what the critics say, the people love him. Now, he has a problem, and that problem is... Sorry, this is not moving us on. There we go. He's not allowed to stand for re-election. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? Because the Constitution prohibits him from doing it. He's got a solution, if you know your Bonapartist history, coup d'etat. He seizes control of the French government and a year later proclaims himself Emperor of the French. So now we don't have to worry about annoying things like re-election. But what's interesting about his regime is he puts this to the people. He holds a referendum. He says, you do not need to rise up against me. And some people do, they're shot. But those who don't, you can vote. There's going to be a referendum. Did I do the right thing? And a year later, should I be emperor? Look at this stunning result. Now, it's worth pointing out, there's no campaign. But, serious point, there is repression, there's censorship, some people are shot, some people are put in prison, but he's immensely popular as well. This is not designed to create support for him. He's got enough support. But what he needs, because the Bonapartist philosophy, it marries kind of democracy with conservatism, is to show that he is the indivisible will of the people. So he needs a landslide to demonstrate that. Now, he's not stupid enough to call a referendum on a question he might lose. But imagine if he had this referendum, and I just pluck a couple of numbers at random, let's say he won it by 52 to 48%. It would be very hard to present that as the will of the people. And in that massive constitution, hold on. Right, so you get the point. It's democracy. He's explaining it to Prince Albert. Prince Albert hates democracy, hates the French, and hates Napoleon III. But don't worry about that. He says, former governments tried to reign by the support of perhaps 1 million of the educated classes. I've tried to lay hold of the other 29 million. So though it's authoritarian, it's also democratic. Confusing, I told you it would be, but stay with me. So what about the Empress? He needs an Empress. And it's a political role that's going to be more than just your traditional Empress, because in some senses, it's also got to represent the people and be democratic. Now, why does he need an Empress? Well, we mentioned Harriet Howard. She is the daughter of a Brighton bootmaker. She's been his mistress for about 6 years, and she's going to be ditched. She's not going to be Empress. She doesn't know that. She finds out about her husband's impending marriage in the newspapers. So he's usually is one of the most attractive, eligible women in the universe. She comes to Paris. Napoleon III has already tried to seduce her. He tries to seduce most women, I have to say. She won't sleep with him. And so eventually he says, right, I'm going to have to marry her. And there's a very famous quip about this by one of the courtiers at the time, which is that Napoleon III became emperor by election, and the empress became empress by a word that rhymes with election, which I won't say because it's afternoon talk. But anyway, Harriet Howard she's been sent off on a spurious mission to get her lover's letters that have been uncovered in London. So there she is waiting for the steamer in a port on the north coast of France. Storm means she can't depart. Next morning, she's having a croissant, reads in the paper, oh, my lover is getting married. She's furious, comes back to Paris, and she won't go quietly. She finds her apartment's been ransacked, love letters destroyed. But what she does is she makes sure that she stands on the direct route that Eugénie and Napoleon III have to drive when they're going into Paris, to the Tuileries. And eventually she's bought off at an extraordinary price. She's given an aristocratic title, a chateau outside Paris, and over £30 million in today's money. So there you go. That's a radical social mobility at the heart of the empire. So Harriet Howard's gone. I shouldn't have mentioned her name in this house. Okay, it's quite bad, but I've done it. So, right, so now listen. Napoleon III needs to get married. For an empire, you need an empress. But, problem, all of the royal houses of Europe absolutely despise Napoleon III. You heard about Prince Albert. He's a parvenu, an adventurer, an intriguer, a womanizer. He is not good son-in-law material. So they all say no. So he eventually goes round, starts at the top, works his way to the bottom. I mean, there's some German princesses, a Swedish one. You know, it's really scraping the barrel of princesses. And he decides, right, well, let's just do Eugénie. Maybe he loved her. Who knows? Well, he does later. We're going to come on to that. It's going to get better for them. But listen, this is the point. He says here, I won't read it all out because I'm conscious of time, but he's embracing the title of parvenu rather than trying to marry into the aristocracy, because it's a very bourgeois, I don't know if anyone here married for love, but it's a very bourgeois thing to do. If you're a top aristocrat, you're not going to marry for love. It's a strategic alliance. And if you're very poor, you just marry someone because, they might be able to cook a meal or something like that. But if you're bourgeois, middle class, democratic, then you can choose your own wife. And that's what he's saying. He's brilliant at spin. So reality, no one wants to marry him from the royal houses, but he presents it to the French people as him. He's like, I'm just like you, all of you who chose your own wife. So there you go. Now, ornament for the throne is his word. He announces it to the French people. This is the speech. And he says she will make a wonderful ornament for the throne. You shouldn't objectify women. I'm afraid Napoleon III does, quite literally in this case. And that's what she begins as. And she's a wonderful or dazzling ornament, shining brightly. She does exactly what you want as an empress and more. She's at the head of this wonderfully opulent, luxurious court. We're going to hear much more about that. Great time for dressmakers and crinoline, and she's a fashion icon. She's absolutely wonderful. Now, of course, the Republican opposition, so Republicans are not the horrible American people. Maybe they're the good guys, who knows. They're people who don't believe there should be a monarchy or an empire. It should be a republic with a president. They're never going to accept this. This is all absolutely frivolous, decadent, wrong, the court. So that it's kind of seen as a revis, parvenu, nouveau riche. Why do the French have so many words for that concept, right? Why don't we have a good old-fashioned English word? But for other people, this is impossibly glamorous, and it's wonderful, and Eugénie is a wonderful front of house for this opulent empire. And she'll go into provincial balls on the arm of the emperor, and here's one of his friends actually says, I saw them cry with emotion when in those great provincial balls on the arm of the emperor's radiant, elegant, noble, beautiful as well as pretty, walked through the crowd. So she's doing exactly what she should do as an empress and more. She's binding people to the regime through her elegance, her grace, and her style. So that's going absolutely swimmingly for her. We're going to hear more about this later, but she's a great diplomatic asset. She's great friends of Queen Victoria. So in 1855, there's an alliance between Britain and France, the Crimean War, there are state visits, Napoleon III goes to London, Victoria comes to Paris, and you can see her here. So on the first state visit, unfortunately, obviously, because Waterloo's a big deal here, one of the gallery in Windsor Castle is named after the battle. So it's like, I'm really sorry, but the state ball, it is going to happen in the Waterloo room. Is that okay? But Napoleon III, very charming, and it's fine. And Victoria loves it. But she's like, me dancing with a Napoleon, the great enemy of England. And you can see there. To think the granddaughter of George III dancing with the nephew of our great enemy, the Emperor Napoleon, now my most firm ally, in the Waterloo Gallery, is incredible. And it absolutely is. This is Eugénie here on the arm of Prince Albert. Prince Albert, he does hate the French, France, and Napoleon III, but he loves Eugénie because she's so charming and beautiful. So there you go. He's overcome I don't really like Prince Albert. Sorry, I don't know if that's allowed to be said. Right. I'm conscious of time. We don't want to talk about mistresses in this house. We've already mentioned Harriet Howard. The problem is the marriage. Napoleon III, he is incredibly faithful to his wife for 6 months, and then not so much, embarks on what he calls his little distractions. That's a euphemism for trying to sleep with pretty much every single woman in France. I said it's a very democratic regime, and he claims to represent all classes, and that's certainly true when it comes to his choice in women. He'll sleep with aristocrats, but also circus performers. So this poor Eugénie suffers immensely, but we shouldn't talk about that today. Okay, so she is much more than an ornament, though, and she also is a serious politician, and she gravitates to politician when her emperor is away, when her husband is away from Paris, right? She rules as regent in his stead. In 1859, he goes off to war. She chairs cabinet meetings. There's a lovely illustration of her doing exactly that there. So this is the ministers, government policy, signing off, etc. And also, after 1866, she's got a taste for politics. Now she's attending cabinet meetings even when the emperor is there, partially because Napoleon III is getting incredibly ill. He's very sick. He's got bladder stones, which makes his life absolute physical agony for much of the time. And they're very worried that he's going to die. So this is sort of to train her up so that she can rule until Napoleon IV, formerly of this parish, never became Napoleon IV, can rule in his father's stead, or if his father dies. So that's what she's doing. There's a problem. So again, a lot of opposition to the empire in France is Republicans. They're never going to accept it. But a lot of the opposition and the hatred that goes towards Eugénie is because of her politics: Catholic, conservative, authoritarian. They may be your politics, but there are plenty of Bonapartists who want the empire to liberalise, to reform, and indeed it does, and she hates that. She's fighting tooth and nail to stop that from happening. Her husband, on the other hand, is a bit of a dreamer and a utopian, and actually does end up liberalising the empire. So afterwards she says, it's because I thought it would destabilise the regime, and then my son won't come to power, but I think that's actually just her politics. That's my view. Also, okay, great question. Who knows the French revolutionary history? First revolution, 1789. Who is the most hated woman in France? Marie Antoinette. Well done. Okay, now, if you were going to marry into a French dynasty, who would be the one person you shouldn't model yourself on? Marie Antoinette. That's Eugénie dressing up as, yes, you guessed it, Marie Antoinette. It's a little bit like if the Queen Consort, Camilla, came into that position and thought, you know what, Duchess of York, she's really done well. Let's see if I can be a bit more like her. So she was obsessed with Marie Antoinette. And as a historian, I love this. She went to the National Archives. You're an empress. You can go in any time. She reads the final letter that Marie Antoinette wrote. It's very heart, moves your heart, blah, blah, blah. But it's such a poor choice. It's such a poor choice. Of course, everyone is making this comparison, right? And then when they've learned that she herself has embraced it, they're like, come on. So the head of secret police says, just as under the time of Louis XVI, everyone said it's the Austrians' fault. Now under Napoleon III, they're saying it's the Spaniards' fault because she is a lightning rod for criticism. She's a woman, okay? It's misogynistic times. So that's a problem. But she doesn't help herself. Still, it's her birthday, so let's be positive. What she does do, charity. She's fantastic at charity. She gets off to a great start. The city of Paris spontaneously decides to give her 600,000 francs. She's like, no, I can't accept it. Let's give it to the poor. Good move, good populist move. She's wonderful at visiting hospitals, founding orphanages. She's really a big, firm believer in primary and secondary education for everyone, but also especially girls, which at the time was pretty radical thinking. So that's great. She also promoted Rosa Bonheur. She's if you like cows, she does lots of paintings of French, bucolic French, cows. She's awarded the Legion d'Honneur, the first ever woman to be awarded that, and that's all thanks to the Empress, visiting cholera victims. Now, back in the 19th century, they didn't know how cholera was spread, hence why there was so much cholera. But the point being that when you're visiting a cholera hospital, although it actually isn't dangerous, because that's not how cholera is spread, it would be a very brave thing to do, because you might, you think, oh, actually, I could catch cholera. So she is really good at that. What she's not good at is foreign policy. First of all, it's first bearing in mind that it's her husband who does the foreign policy, but she does not give good advice. So two things she's really associated with. One is France invades Mexico. Did you know that? No, pretty mad idea. There's a brilliant book about this. Absolutely should read it. So I won't go into too much more detail. But Eugénie, she's absolutely central to it because she's Spanish. These Mexican conspirators come in and they say, oh, it would be a great idea to invade Mexico. We'll found a monarchy. It'll be really popular. So they send the French army to do this. It's not popular. The man they send to be Emperor Maximilian, younger brother of Franz Joseph, Emperor of Austria, ends up getting executed by firing squad. You know your foreign policy has gone badly when that happens, right? And she is central to it. She's really promoting it. She's also very Catholic. Now, for reasons that would take, I would say, 3 days to properly explain. There are French troops in Rome, but Italy has united, except for the capital, Rome, where the Pope rules as a kingdom. For lots of Catholics at the time, it's really important that he does, and so they don't want the Italian nationalists to take Rome. Of course, Italian nationalists, that's the capital of Italy. We really want to have Rome. Hence Giuseppe Garibaldi's famous phrase, Rome or death. He sort of every few years tries to seize Rome. Every few years is massacred by French troops. And Garibaldi's slogan was Rome or death. And Eugénie was very much like, well, absolutely, yes, it's going to be death then. That's the choice. It's not going to be Rome. Makes her really unpopular, as I say, amongst kind of right-thinking, woke Parisians, even Bonapartists, and Napoleon III, anyway, it's complicated. So she's associated with this. Again, it's her birthday, so let's be positive. The Suez Canal, opened in 1869. Now, there's trouble in Paris. It looks like revolution is brewing. Napoleon III is ill. He loves canals. He really loves canals, but he can't go. So he sends Eugénie, and she goes with her turtle and about 200 trunks, all made by Louis Vuitton. Opening ceremony. So this is her yacht, leading a flotilla of European ships, opening this waterway that's going to change the world. It's built by French capital and technology and expertise, and also thousands of Egyptians. This shows the grandeur, the magnificence of France in 1869. As you can see from the quote there, she says, the frightful nightmare, that's the danger of revolution, vanished. I was convinced that a wonderful future lay in store for my son. Sorry, not going to happen, Eugénie, sorry. But you can see, she's wonderful again in this. She's going trekking across desert, she's visiting the pyramids, and she's representing France and doing a very good job, which is the last nice thing I'm going to say about her, because unfortunately, no, don't worry, I will say more nice stuff. There's a big problem in 1870, and that big problem is the Franco-Prussian War. Now, again, arcane history, but to simplify it massively, the Prussians are the rising power in Germany. Bismarck wants to unite Germany behind Prussia, get Bavaria and other places into united Germany. Best way to do that is a common hatred. Who better to hate than the French? You need a war for that. And they've engineered this situation where they want to put a Prussian candidate on the Spanish throne. Napoleon says, like, no, wait, you can't do that because then we'll be, encircled. And there's a stunning diplomatic triumph. Prussia backs down. They agree to withdraw their candidate after diplomatic protests. So this should be, that's the first quote just to show that she really didn't like the liberalization that was going on. She is unhappy with this arrangement. So she says to her husband that it was a ridiculous solution and would not satisfy French opinion. France is humiliated and affronted in the eyes of Europe. In the heart of every Frenchman, there will be an explosion of wrath against the emperor, and that means the end of the empire. So she was right about that final thing, but not for the reasons that she thought. So she's urging Napoleon III, you have to get guarantees from Prussia that they'll never do it again. Napoleon III goes to Prussia and says, you have to guarantee you'll never send someone to be king of Spain. Prussia's like, come on, we've already settled this. And then Napoleon III declares war, which is not a good idea because they don't have a plan. The military is massively incompetent, and he's going to lead the army, and he's not a very good military commander. He's also incredibly ill and sick. So who's regent in Paris? Eugénie is in Paris looking after things, but she's not looking after them tremendously well. I'm sorry, I have to say this. What happens is one battle after another, the French lose to the Prussians, who are superior in pretty much every respect, especially artillery and leadership. So Napoleon III sensibly resigns his command and says, let's give it to a general, someone who actually knows about warfare. Unfortunately, he gives it to someone who turns out to be even more incompetent than him, but who knew? So what he should do now is go back to Paris, because the situation in Paris is bad. Okay, the news of defeats are pouring in. But Eugénie says, absolutely no. No, she shouted. I do not want him to return. he's going to come back victorious or dead. That's what she's saying. Even worse, he scraped together an army. So one French army has been encircled near Metz on the eastern border. They managed to scrape together another army, what remains of the professional army. And that, all military logic, says that must fall back on Paris, meet the Prussians in force outside Paris, and Eugénie absolutely, and that's what Napoleon III decides to do. But his wife overrules him. Napoleon III has lost confidence in his judgment, unfortunately, at one time where he probably is making good decisions. And I'll come on to that in a minute. She says, no, you've got to go and fight. And so the French army lumbers towards a place called Sedan. The French are outnumbered. They are going down, fighting, but tens of thousands of people are going to die. Napoleon III is riding along through the battlefield, possibly looking for a lucky bullet. But in the end, he doesn't find death. But he does find, I think, incredible courage as the shells are exploding around him outside his HQ. And as I say, he's been on the battlefield, he surrenders, and thereby saving tens of thousands of lives of French soldiers. Now, when Eugénie hears the news that he has surrendered and that he's alive, I don't know about you, if my partner find that I survived an awful battle, I'd want her to be happy. I would. I think not. That's not her reaction. No! The emperor has not surrendered, and Napoleon never surrenders. He is dead, and they're trying to hide it from me. Why didn't he have himself buried under the walls of Sedan? So that's the town. Could he not feel that he was disgracing himself? What a name to leave his son. Wow. Yikes. Okay, she's Spanish and Scottish. She's got a temper. So she's not happy. The people of Paris are even more unhappy. They storm into Parliament. They storm into the Tuileries where she is. They probably, they want to lynch her. The obsession with Marie Antoinette, not so bad here, because it looks like what's going to happen. This is a recreation of this scene. So she's out running out the Tuileries through the Louvre, and she bundles into a cab where she's driven off through crowds baying for her blood, the Spanish woman, to an American dentist, bizarrely, who squirrels her out of Paris and then to here eventually. And this is doesn't look like that. This is a recreation. I mean, this is crowds baying for blood, chanting death to the Spanish woman, overthrow the regime, all of this stuff. And she's absolutely right. The name to leave to her son, well, the Napoleonic brand has been almost irrevocably tarnished. This is a Republican caricature, and she's here represented as a crane. The tambourine represents Spain, and it's not very nice, ultimately. So let's not look at it too long. It's her birthday, so I'm going to finish, and you'll be pleased to know I am going to finish on a positive note. And I'm going to finish here in this wonderful establishment, which is where she ends up after the fall. And so you remember those guys I mentioned at the beginning, Plan-Plan, Persigny, so the best friend and Napoleon III's cousin. They come into this very house and they confront her and they blame her for the fall of the empire. And they say, but we've got a cunning plan. And that cunning plan, bizarrely, has the backing of Otto von Bismarck. Now, Otto von Bismarck, when he didn't want to end the Second Empire. He wanted to go to war with France, have a weak France and weak empire on the border of Germany. That's all good. He didn't want a radical republic that might have sort of revolutionary fervour and nationalism and be hell-bent on revenge, which is, of course, what happens. So he thinks, okay, maybe we can get these guys back on the throne. And so they had concocts a conspiracy where they're going to use Prussian troops and the kind of connivance of Prussia to get them back on the throne. And Plan-Plan and Persigny are right, yes, let's do it. We just need you to sign off on it. And usually it's like, no, I am not going to do that because it would be disastrous for us to be working with the enemies of France. So sound political judgment, Eugénie. Well done. Good. I mean, a bit too late, maybe, but still, good. And Plan-Plan, his cousin, who's a despicable man, she says to him, you are our most dangerous enemy, because he'd spent 20 years criticising and just being horrible, and then shaking her fist, so you can see. When I return as regent, I will know how to make all heads bow, and yours as well. I am Spanish. Wow, you got the fire, you got the temper. And the other good thing it's an expensive way of doing couples therapy, but the Franco-Prussian War was really good for their marriage. Napoleon III and Eugénie. I mean, not having a sort of bevy of fine courtiers to sleep with helps, but they come here, they're very happy, they're very loving. And this is a wonderful letter that Eugénie writes, 30th January 1871. Today is our wedding anniversary. I am very deeply attached to you. In happiness, these ties loosened, for reasons that we know. I thought they were broken, but it took a stormy day to show how strong they are. May my devotion make you forget for a moment the trials of your great soul. Your great soul has gone through. Your adorable gentleness makes me think of our Lord. Touching. Very touching. Now, the only thing about this is, having read all of their correspondence, he writes a letter on the same day, 30th of January, 1871, wedding anniversary. doesn't mention the wedding anniversary. So I wonder if when that letter arrives here, there might have been a few more screams and shouts. But they do have a lovely old time here, insofar as they can in exile in this wonderful house. And as I say, this shows great political judgment. I mean, Napoleon III is not fondly remembered, but he would be even less fondly remembered if he had been part of a conspiracy with the Prussians to try and take back the throne of France in his own interest. And she is instrumental in not doing that. She lives a long afterlife. I'm going to wrap up super quick, but just some wonderful pictures. That's age 93. That's her last public photo. She goes to a mass in France on the way to, she's got a wonderful villa in the south of France. She leaves here. I'm sure people will talk about why she leaves here. And here she is with 3 other empresses. So a former Tsarina and the Queen Mother, of course, Empress of India. So you imagine what these 3 empresses are talking about. This is in 1910s off the top of my head. And she lives an extraordinary life and does all kinds of extraordinary stuff after the fall of the Second Empire. And she tends to be on the right side of history after the empire falls. She kind of befriends all kinds like suffragists, and she's really into the telephone, which is a big deal back then, and things like that. So she's a remarkable afterlife, which I'm afraid wasn't the subject of this talk. And if you want to know more, this is super important. So burn this into your retinas. There's a book coming out on 2nd of July about the Second Empire, Napoleon III, and where you can learn a lot more about the wonderful, fabulous history and, of course, the wonderful, fabulous Empress who lived here. Thank you very much.